It's Tuesday, September 30th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. Today on the show, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and the President give a bizarre and very political speech to hundreds of military leaders who were called in from around the world to listen to them. So I'm going to talk about what we heard from both Hegseth and Trump, why it matters for Trump specifically, and how he thinks about the military as something that he gets to control as a private force, and what it means for the future of how our military operates towards service members, but also civilians. And then I'm going to spend a little time at the end of this episode here catching you up on the government shutdown, which absolutely looks like it's going to happen as I'm recording here, unless some sort of miracle deal is reached. But first, make sure you're following or subscribe to the show, whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. If you're a watcher on YouTube, sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack. It's just $5 a month. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on Twitter and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. All right, let's get on with the show. Today's episode is brought to you by Distill Union. Founded in 2011, Distill Union crafts everyday essentials like wallets, key organizers, phone cases, and stands, believing that less is more makes good design. They've earned a reputation for creating problem-solving products that are both intuitive and elegant. I like their flagship Wally wallet because, there's nothing worse than having that bulky wallet that sits in your back pocket for guys specifically. It's bad for my back. I can feel it after I've been sitting, especially on the chair that I use to record in here. It's not exactly the most comfortable chair, and if I've got my wallet on me, it's uncomfortable if it's not slim and elegant like their Wally wallets. But they're known for their magnetic closures and that slim profile to hold all of my cards and cash. I love them. And they just launched a Kickstarter for brand new Maglock belts. I don't know exactly what that means, but it kind of sounds cool as hell. Anyway, Distill Union's problem-solving accessories are made from premium materials like full-grain leather that ages beautifully over time, ensuring durability and style. Backed by a 3-year warranty, their products are built to last and engineered for everyday ease, offering the perfect balance of practicality and sophistication. And right now, when you use the code MIMS25, that's MIMS25, you'll get 20% off your entire order. And Make It Make Sense does get a cut of that sale, but hey, it keeps the show going, keeps you in style. What's not to love? You can check out DistillUnion.com for all their great products. That's DISTIL Union.com. Distill Union, where good design is good for you. All right, let's get back to the show. Today, 800 or so top generals, admirals, and flag officers in the U.S. Armed Forces sat in an auditorium in Quantico, Virginia, like a school assembly. They were forced to listen to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and President Donald Trump talk about what's next for the U.S. military. Hegseth spoke for less than an hour about the new direction that he wants to take the U.S. military in, which is the same direction he's been taking it in since he was sworn in. He wants to go back to the Department of Defense of 35 years ago, where women don't serve in combat roles, where black and brown service members don't move up in leadership roles equitably, and where LGBTQ members of the armed forces are forced to serve in the closet. But for some context here, this assembly of top military leaders is very unusual. It's practically unheard of outside of active wars, even really more world wars. And even in those, top brass wouldn't be called to fly, for many of them, halfway around the world to attend something like this. And in this case, they're hearing a 2-hour lecture from a man in Hegseth who never rose above an infantry officer rank, and in Trump, a man who dodged the draft. But these two are lecturing top generals, 800 of them, about proper military service. It was so sudden, the calling of this meeting last week, that it confused and worried many of these generals and admirals and their staff who came with them. They were pulled away from their active duty positions, and it was expensive to get them here at the drop of a hat like that, with, at that point, no understanding of what this meeting was going to be about. There was a lot of fear that it would be about questioning their loyalty, and that was in these speeches today, subtly and not so subtly, but it was also about a drastic change in how the military is going to be used going forward. And let's start there. Hegseth opened his speech by telling these leaders to get ready for war.
To ensure peace, we must prepare for war. From this moment forward, the only mission of the newly restored Department of War is this: warfighting, preparing for war and preparing to win.
So this stance has been on the Trump agenda since the very beginning, despite his promises during the campaign to be a president who didn't start wars. And Trump himself talks more about this kind of idea in his own speech, but it's a wildly different stance than the U.S. military has taken in previous decades, because the thinking of the Department of Defense has been that the U.S. military is a force for stability, not volatility. And yes, that stance hasn't always meant staying out of conflicts or wars, but it wasn't an active posture of a country looking for a fight, which is what Hegseth is describing here, both one abroad and at home. But far and away, his speech was almost entirely directed at internal policies. In his words, going from woke to war, because they recently named on paper the Department of Defense the Department of War. And that means undoing decades of policies that were meant to make the military more modern, more agile, and yes, more diverse. He started with the idea that he doesn't like seeing fat people in the military. Here's that.
Frankly, it's tiring to look out at combat formations, or really any formation, and see fat troops. Likewise, it's completely unacceptable to see fat generals and admirals in the halls of the Pentagon and leading commands around the country and the world. It's a bad look. It is bad, and it's not who we are.
It's a bad look. Hegseth isn't talking about qualifications here or training military members for their specific jobs better. He's talking about how the military looks to him and how it looks on camera. He goes on to talk about how every day, every active military member should go through rigorous PT or physical training, and then makes fun of yoga for a bit and says if he can do PT, so can everyone else. And I encourage you on that point to look up the recent video of him from last month, working out with RFK Jr. Not a push-up or pull-up will be found in that video. But anyway, in a way, this makes sense, what Hegseth is talking about here. He was an infantry guy, a grunt. He was a body thrown into the trenches, and that's what he understands about how wars are fought and how the military operates. But the military is more than that, so much more. And rapidly, it's becoming less and less about boots on the ground and more about intelligence, commanding the cybersecurity space, and remote fighting. I'm not saying that the military shouldn't have physical standards, but focusing more on those means taking away focus from other, at this point, frankly, more modernizing areas of the military. But what's really underlying all of this here is what Hegseth said about removing women from combat roles and allowing for a more harsh, fear-based approach to the military.
Any place where tried and true physical standards were altered, especially since 2015 when combat arms standards were changed to ensure females could qualify, must be returned to their original standard. I'm issuing new policies that will overhaul the IG, EO, and MEO processes. I call it the no more walking on eggshells policy. We are liberating commanders and NCOs. We are liberating you. We are overhauling an inspector general process, the IG, that has been weaponized, putting complainers, ideologues, and poor performers in the driver's seat. We're doing the same with the equal opportunity and military equal opportunity policies, the EO and MEO at our department. No more frivolous complaints, no more anonymous complaints, no more repeat complainants, no more smearing reputations, no more endless waiting, no more legal limbo, no more sidetracking careers.
So while Hegseth does say that things like out-and-out racism and sex crimes are wrong and will be punished, getting rid of independent investigators, anonymous reporting, and reporting about repeat offenders is meant to make people less safe and will make the military less cohesive. It'll likely force women, members of color, and service members who are gay or trans to quit because they know that they're likely to be victims of harassment and more serious crimes in the military. According to the Cost of War Project from Brown University, in 2023, there were more than 73,000 sexual assaults alone reported by service members. That independent data was collected by the project and then found that their numbers were 2.5 times higher than the quote-unquote official ones from the Pentagon. And that was with the independent investigators that Hegseth wants to get rid of now. We also know that 24% of women in the military say that they've been the victims of some sort of sexual assault, and recent surveys of military members have found deep-rooted racism in the U.S. military as an institution. And while Hegseth says he's not going to tolerate those things, like I said before, it's not hard to see that he also wants to build a culture in the military where those things aren't taken seriously. Hegseth has previously said that he doesn't think women should serve in combat roles, and recently eliminated a Pentagon task force meant to help women succeed in the military. And he wants to make the military experience overall just a little bit worse for everyone. Case in point, how he wants to change how drill instructors do their jobs, moving away from the now tested decades-old approach to get military members ready for their roles through respect, and more a one-size-fits-all full metal jacket kind of thing.
That point. Basic training is being restored to what it should be. Scary, tough, and disciplined. We're empowering drill sergeants to instill healthy fear in new recruits, ensuring that future warfighters are forged. Yes, they can shark attack, they can toss bunks, they can swear, and yes, they can put their hands on recruits. This does not mean they can be reckless or violate the law, but they can use tried and true methods to motivate.
So Hegseth wants military members to be hazed and to have a healthy fear beat into them. And I know that some of you out there are going to be like, well, that's the military, but it isn't. And it hasn't been since George W. Bush was in office. In fact, he was the one who implemented these new, more respectful drill guidelines. And what Hegseth actually wants here is going back to a style of training recruits that we haven't seen since like 1990. That's 35 years ago. The same thing goes with his physical fitness requirements. He wants to take that back to 1990 standards as well. We've known for decades now that abusive drill tactics in the military, like shark attacks, which is where drill sergeants swarm around a random recruit to scream at them to create a stressful situation, or physically touching or harming recruits, those things actually increase basic training dropout rates, sometimes called washout rates. It makes people less likely to sign up for the military in general, and generally it doesn't help recruits understand the jobs that they're preparing for in the military, even during basic training, when most of the time nobody has an assignment yet. It forces people out of the military who would otherwise have been fine service members, but weren't going to stick around because they weren't going to get treated like shit. But that's what Hegseth wants to go back to. It's a made-for-TV war movie, G.I. Joe style military. He also told generals who weren't on board with his new plans to resign, and promised that more firings are on the way.
More leadership changes will be made, of that I'm certain. Not because we want to, but because we must. Once again, this is life and death. The sooner we have the right people, the sooner we can advance the right policies. Personnel is policy. But I look out at this group, and I see great Americans. Leaders who have given decades to our great republic, at great sacrifice to yourselves and to your families. But if the words I'm speaking today are making your heart sink, then you should do the honorable thing and resign.
So this is the exact thing that national security experts, veterans, and current anonymous military members who talked to media outlets across the country were worried about. That these things would not come with just new directives, because that happens when you get a new administration in the White House and in the DOD and in the Pentagon, but that they would come with increased tests of loyalty. Now, was it the 1935 German military oath change? No. Is it about these generals' qualifications and the results they're getting? No. And that's what people were worried about, and Hegseth said this part out loud. And now, before we move on to what Trump said here, I want to talk about an elephant in the room, and that's that military recruitment is up right now. You're going to hear that a lot, especially from people in the Trump administration, when you hear reports about this speech. For the first time in several years, it is true that military recruitment hit its goal in 2024, and it's on track to do it again in 2025. But recruitment is complicated, and indicators point to the fact that military recruitment was already on the rise after dipping a little bit in 2022 and 2023, mostly because recruits come right out of high school or early college, and the military, like the rest of the workforce, was dealing with the long tail of how COVID impacted kids and young adults. More time spent online because of the pandemic meant fewer abilities for people to go to things like job fairs where the military will set up recruiters, meaning fewer chances to convince someone to join up. The other thing that may be driving recruitment right now is the looming recession. As unemployment goes up broadly, we generally see more people sign up for the military because if there are fewer jobs out there or there's more competition for fewer numbers of those jobs, military service and the steady-ish paycheck that comes with it looks pretty good to a lot of people, especially people without college degrees. So while yes, recruitment is up, it at least right now doesn't seem to be driven by Hegseth's push to quote-unquote end wokeness, and in fact those things may end up slowing recruitment for all the reasons I talked about a minute ago. But let's move on to Trump's end of the speech here, because it's where things go from bizarre to potentially dangerous. Now, before I move on, because you're going to hear some clips here, Trump was also visibly tired looking. He did not sound good. He was much more sluggish than we've seen him be recently. He was bouncing from idea to idea, which isn't uncommon for him, but it was much more abrupt than it's been lately. And he revisited the same issues 3 or 4, sometimes 5 times, and he would wander off prompter a lot more. There was even a minute or so long digression about where he was afraid of falling down the stairs. It was really, really weird and not doing him any favors in the conversations about his age and health right now. But beside that, Trump talked about politics a lot. His political enemies. He insulted Joe Biden. He insulted Obama. He talked about Democratic leaders around the country. And it was weird for a lot of reasons. But the main one is the commander-in-chief usually leaves domestic politics at the door when talking with, about, and to military leaders, or military members, for that matter. The military is an apolitical institution that doesn't get involved in what happens in the back and forth between Republicans and Democrats, and it certainly doesn't get involved in retribution against the president's personal political enemies. But that's what Trump wants here. He said it multiple times about fighting enemies, foreign and domestic, and he put the emphasis on domestic.
Run by the radical left Democrats, what they've done to San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, they're very unsafe places, and we're going to straighten them out one by one. And this is going to be a major part for some of the people in this room. That's a war, too. It's a war from within.
Almost unheard of from an American president to talk to military leaders like this about other American citizens. Trump means in that statement his dislike of Democrats necessitates the use of military force against places where Democrats are leaders. It is and should be alarming. It is also illegal to use the military against American citizens, especially in those cities he mentioned where crime is falling right now, or in places like Los Angeles, where judges have ruled that he sent in the military illegally. But Trump knows that. It's why he told us how he thinks he can get around the law, too.
It's really a very important mission. And I told Pete we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military. Because we're going into Chicago very soon. That's a big city with an incompetent governor, stupid.
Again, it's pretty clear that this would be illegal on a number of fronts, but we'll see what happens if Trump tries to do it to a place like, say, Chicago. This week, he already sent troops to Portland and was immediately sued and said that Portland was burning and on fire. And in this speech said Seattle was next, but neither of those places are the way that he's describing them. And I think it's worth pointing out here, too, that Trump kept making reference to law enforcement, local and federal. He kept making references to firefighters and first responders while talking to these military generals and admirals. And on one level, it was a very childlike way for Trump to talk about the military, like he was just lumping the people in uniform you'd see in a kid's book all in the same place. But on a much more serious level, it was telling, because Trump doesn't see a difference between the military and first responders, even though the military is trained for foreign wars and first responders are definitely not. He made those comparisons often in this speech, and given how he thinks about federal law enforcement and the Department of Justice as his own personal police and legal force, it's pretty clear that he sees the military as his own plaything to be used within U.S. borders as well. And he, too, like Hegseth, put a loyalty test out there in broad daylight. Trump was talking about the chairman of the Army, a guy named General Dan Cain, who Trump likes to call Raisin Cain, as in raise or destroy. It was Cain's call sign during the Iraq War. Trump asked the generals in the room here to raise their hand if they liked Cain or not. Here it is.
Cain, he's fantastic, by the way. I hope you all agree. If anybody disagrees, could I please have your hand? Who disappears at Raisin Cain is no good? Just raise your hand. I don't see any hands raised. All right. That means you're okay. That means that.
So obviously no one put their hand up, but it was really interesting as a moment here, not just because the President of the United States asked generals to make personal opinions public in front of all of their peers and to him, but also because no one laughed. There were no murmurs. In fact, one of the weirdest parts of the entire assembly for both Trump and Hegseth is there was almost no applause or reaction. The room was dead silent the entire time, and not in a way that, like, they were so wrapped up in what was being said, they were in awe. It was way more like silence because they were sitting in this bizarre set of speeches. Now, the last thing that Trump made clear here is that he thinks the military is also about money. He doesn't see a difference between being the commander-in-chief and being able to pick up the phone and call defense contractors or major defense corporations. He seems to view the military as an ATM for some of those biggest corporate backers. Here's how he talked about it.
We're backlogged on all the equipment, which is something that's new to us a little bit. And I told those companies, you better get your ass going because we're selling you a lot of equipment. We're getting countries to buy your equipment. You got to produce the equipment. Some of the countries, I'm not going to mention, but some of the countries are buying a lot. And that's a good thing. They're on our side. 95%. I'll never say 100% because they can always turn, right? You know about that. But they're on our side. The problem is we have to get the companies that make this equipment. And we make the best equipment in the world, but they got to make it fast.
Okay, so first, I got to say a thing about the 95% number there. It certainly seemed like the president just said we may be brokering arms sales to, at the very least, potentially adversarial forces to the U.S., which doesn't seem great. But second, these generals don't work for defense companies. They don't work to sell equipment to other countries. In fact, it's illegal for them to do so while they're members of the military. The military and what's known as the military-industrial complex, the private side of who makes weapons and vehicles and tech, are not the same thing. But Trump sees all of these things as the same and clearly doesn't see that blurring those lines is a problem. Because do you want the military to be separate from the private industrial military complex? You want them to be separate because their goals are different. There are specific goals and ends the U.S. military has that often has to do with national security. The goals of the contractors and those companies is to make as much money as possible. They're not the same thing. But just like the idea of using the military against U.S. citizens, Trump sees all of it as this thing that's under his control. Laws, norms, and basic understandings of the consequences of blurring those lines be damned. Okay, so before I end this episode, there's one more thing that I got to talk about here, and it's a hard turn away from the military. We're going to take a look at Congress because we are going to get our government shut down as far as everything looks as I'm recording. I talked about this last week on Thursday, and if you haven't listened to that episode, I break down how and why we're going to see a shutdown and why both sides might win by losing here, but at its most simple, Republicans want to fund the government at the levels it's at now. Democrats want to put back in place some healthcare subsidies and protections that were cut over the summer before health insurance premiums spike on November 1st. Republicans are blaming Democrats for making demands right now, but also Trump, who has been much more involved in these talks than past presidents tend to be, canceled the meeting with Democratic leaders last week and did not have a productive meeting yesterday with these leaders, forcing the Vice President, J.D. Vance, to say we're heading for a shutdown. While Democrats want to stop about 6 million people from losing health care over the next 10 years by putting back these subsidies, control of Congress isn't up to them. Republicans right now control the House, the Senate, the White House, and the Supreme Court, meaning they're in full control. They're in the driver's seat here. And these things, these negotiations about budgets are supposed to be messy and compromises are supposed to be made. But while Republicans are blaming the Democrats, they're not countering anything either, so it's not exactly a negotiation and much more of a standoff. There are also implications that the Epstein files don't get released if the government shuts down, which is something that Trump wants. Members of his administration want to start mass firings as a part of their overall plan, and they can do that if the government shuts down. And if there's a shutdown, Democrats are going to try to use that to say they stood up to the president, hoping to score points with their own voters who are disappointed in them. But it looks like we're going to get at least some kind of shutdown. The record was set during Trump's first term between 2018 and 2019. It was 35 days long, and it cost billions of dollars and threatened livelihoods and lives. And it would seem like none of those consequences mattered this time around either. So when the clock strikes midnight tonight, if there's no deal, there's a shutdown. All right. That's it for today's show. Please rate and review on whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, leave a comment below if you're a watcher on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got a brand new article coming out tomorrow. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims Newspod. That's MIMS Newspod, all one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on Twitter and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Granthermes, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.